The war should have been over before it even began. That's what the Zalzir High Command believed when they launched their invasion of Sol 3b, an uninhabited barren world orbiting the ruined husk of Earth. No atmosphere, no resources worth mining, no military presence. It was a dead rock in the cold void, the perfect place for a demonstration of power. The Zalzir had not come to conquer. They had come to send a message. 100 warships hovered in low orbit, their sleek insectoid hulls reflecting the dim light of Sol. Plasma cannons glowed, ready to reduce the forgotten world to dust. The Zalzir admiral, clad in ceremonial war armor, stood before the holographic projection of the planet. His mandibles clicked in satisfaction. "This is the last insult," he declared to his fleet. "For too long, the Terran remnants have defied us. Their scattered fleets still resist, but after today they will understand humanity is finished." A single command. The fleet opened fire. Blazing energy lances carved deep scars into the planet's surface. Missile storms reduced entire sections of the terrain to molten slag. The once silent rock trembled under the fury of a species that prided itself on its dominion over lesser civilizations. Then the ground moved, not from the bombardment, but from something else. In the wreckage of craters and shattered bedrock, massive steel structures began to rise. Not ruins, not abandoned facilities, weapons, gigantic turrets hidden for centuries beneath layers of rock and dust groaned as ancient servos roared to life. Towers emerged like the skeletal remains of giants, their cores pulsing with a sinister red glow. The planet was not dead. It had just been sleeping. Before the Zalzir fleet could react, the warships detected a surge of power from below, hundreds of locked-on targeting systems. The ground-based turrets fired in unison. Red beams sliced through the void, hitting directly at the Zalzir warships. Shields flickered and failed. Hulls ruptured. The fleet, so confident in their supremacy, found themselves under attack from a force they never knew existed. The dead planet had woken up, and it was angry. The Zalzir fleet was in chaos. Admiral Vroth, once so certain of victory, watched in horror as his ships were torn apart by an unseen enemy. The ancient planetary defenses had emerged like spectral warriors from the grave, lashing out with relentless precision. His communications channels were flooded with distress signals, requests for retreat, for reinforcements, for anything that could explain what was happening. This planet was supposed to be dead, one of his officers shrieked. Vroth's mandibles tightened. This was no accident. This was a trap. For over a century, humanity had been a dwindling force in the galaxy. The Zalzir had driven them to the brink of extinction, crushing their homeworlds and scattering the survivors across the void. The few human warships that remained were nothing more than raiders, defying the inevitable, prolonging their slow demise. But this was not desperation. This was preparation. Sol 3b, long dismissed as an abandoned rock, had been transformed into an automated war machine. The planet itself had become a battlefield, its surface concealing weapons of impossible scale, lying dormant for decades. But who had built them? The Zalzir had conquered Earth. They had burned its cities, broken its armies. They had believed. Humanity had no more secrets left to hide. They were wrong. Vroth had led countless victories for the Zalzir Empire. He had crushed entire civilizations beneath his fleet's might, dismantling their defenses with cold efficiency. He had never known defeat. But now, for the first time in his career, he feared something he did not understand. Who was controlling these defenses? Were humans still hiding here, deep beneath the surface? Had they developed some form of AI warfare beyond the Zalzir's understanding? Or worse, had the war itself changed humanity into something else? Deep below the planet's surface, in a hidden command center buried beneath layers of reinforced steel and rock, a single human watched the carnage unfold. Captain Elias Voss leaned back in his chair, a grim smile forming as he listened to the panicked transmissions of the Zalzir fleet. "It took you bastards long enough," he muttered. Voss was one of the last, a soldier from a war that had ended years ago, a war where humanity had lost everything. He and a handful of survivors had vanished from the records, presumed dead, forgotten by history. But they hadn't died. They had gone underground, and they had prepared. The planet's surface had been transformed into a monument to vengeance. Before the fall of Earth, before the Zalzir's final assault, humanity had seen the writing on the wall. They had known that survival meant more than just running. It meant waiting, it meant planning, it meant turning their own graves into weapons. For decades, thousands of automated defense platforms had been hidden beneath Sol 3B's crust. Entire military bases were buried in its depths, their technology silently evolving in the dark. The planet had not been abandoned, it had been rearmed. And now, the moment had come. The dead planet had become a battleground. The ghosts of humanity were about to make their final stand, Admiral Vroth's remaining fleet scattered in panic. The first wave of planetary counterfire had already obliterated nearly 20 Zalzir warships, entire vessels reduced to burning wreckage in seconds. The Admiral's mind raced, struggling to make sense of it. How had they missed this? How? Had the Zalzir, the apex conquerors of the galaxy, failed to detect such a monstrous defense system? He snapped toward his command crew. "Full retreat! Break orbit! Now!" The fleet responded sluggishly, the Zalzir warships shifting formation, in a desperate attempt to evade the planetary bombardment. But Sol 3B wasn't done. From beneath the surface, they emerged. Enormous war structures, hidden for decades, now revealed themselves in all their terrible glory. Towers, sleek and angular, rose from the craters, their bases humming with immense energy. Weapons platforms the size of cities locked onto their new targets. Then the second wave hit. Titanic energy beams erupted from the ground, punching straight through the Zalzir fleet's defenses. The nearest warship, a behemoth of the Zalzir, Armada, a dreadnought capable of razing entire worlds, took a direct hit. Its shields flared violently, struggling against the onslaught for a brief, flickering moment. Then they collapsed. The dreadnought ruptured in half, its remains scattering across the planet's atmosphere. What should have been an easy demonstration of force had become a massacre, and the worst part, not a single human warship had fired a shot. This was the work of something else, something ancient and relentless. Deep beneath Sol 3B's surface, Captain Elias Voss watched through a flickering interface, his fingers hovering over the holographic controls. He could hear the Zalzir's communications, their voices filled with disbelief, their once arrogant tone now laced with terror. They had no idea what was happening. Voss exhaled slowly. "Let's say hello, shall we?" With a casual flick of his fingers, he activated the broadcast channel. Above the planet, every remaining Zalzir warship, every officer, every crew member heard a voice, a human voice. "You shouldn't have come here." The message was short, cold, final. The Zalzir fell silent. Vroth's eyes narrowed. A human? Impossible. Humanity had been all but erased from the galactic stage. If there were any survivors, they were scattered, weak, barely clinging to the fringes of space. And yet, here they were, waiting. Vroth's mandibles clenched. Enough! He would not let his forces be humiliated by ghosts. All remaining ships, concentrate fire. Destroy their defenses. The fleet reorganized. Warships pulled into coordinated attack. Formations, targeting the colossal structures rising from the planet's surface. Hundreds of plasma lances and kinetic slugs rained down upon Sol 3B. Explosions blossomed across the ground. Some of the automated towers crumbled under the relentless barrage, their outer armor rupturing. The Zalzir roared in triumph as a dozen planetary defenses collapsed, but then something else happened. The planet shifted. Beneath the surface, unseen mechanisms moved. Reinforcements emerged. What the Zalzir had just destroyed was nothing but the outermost layer. Below, larger, deadlier defenses were already coming online. From deep underground, massive artillery cannons, the kind that once defended Earth's last strongholds, began to rise. Their barrels turned toward the enemy and fired. The Zalzir fleet had never seen firepower like this. Titanic shells, each the size of a starship, launched from the surface. The shockwaves rippled through the void, slamming into the Zalzir warships before they could maneuver away. Ships buckled, their hulls torn apart by the sheer force of the attack. And then the real horror struck. Hidden among the artillery fire, something else had launched from Sol 3B. At first, it looked like debris, nothing more than shattered metal. But then, the debris moved. They were drones, thousands of fully autonomous combat drones, armed with human-engineered weaponry, now swarmed toward the remnants of the Zalzir fleet. Vroth watched, his mind struggling to comprehend the sight. This planet wasn't just defended, it was alive. The Zalzir fleet had never invaded a dead world. They had awakened a sleeping giant. The few remaining Zalzir ships turned to flee. They had underestimated humanity. Again. For centuries, the Zalzir had believed their war against humans was won, that the Terran race was broken, scattered, irrelevant, but this battle had proven otherwise. Humanity had never surrendered. They had simply waited for the right moment, waited for their enemies to get too comfortable. And now, as Vroth's fleet burned, as his empire's arrogance turned to ash, he finally understood the terrible truth. Humanity was still out there, and they had never stopped fighting. Admiral Vroth watched in horror as the remnants of his once mighty fleet crumbled. The autonomous human drones were relentless, tearing through the Zalzir warships with ruthless efficiency. Plasma bolts from his ships barely scratched their surfaces before the machines returned fire. With weapons specifically designed to penetrate Zalzir shielding, Vroth's mandibles trembled. This was no accident. This wasn't just a planetary defense system. It was a trap. A carefully laid, masterfully executed ambush, waiting decades for an enemy foolish enough to awaken it, and his fleet had walked right into it. "Order all ships to fall back," he barked. "Break away from orbit." The remaining Zalzir vessels scrambled to escape, but the drones were faster. Hundreds of sleek jet-black machines swarmed like a mechanical storm, ripping through hull plating and targeting critical systems with terrifying precision. Engines exploded, shields failed. Entire ships were torn apart in moments. The Zalzir were no longer fighting a battle, they were being exterminated. Deep beneath the surface of Sol 3B, Captain Elias Voss leaned back in his chair, watching as the war above reached its inevitable conclusion. His fingers hovered over a final command sequence. One last trick, one last lesson for the Zalzir. A message etched into fire and blood. Begin override. The drones, as if commanded by a single mind, suddenly ceased their assault. They stopped firing. They hovered in place, their red optics glowing ominously as the remaining Zalzir ships frantically tried to flee. Admiral Vroth's breathing was ragged. Were they surrendering? Malfunctioning? Had he somehow survived this nightmare? Then his ship systems locked up. Every remaining Zalzir warship shut down simultaneously. Engines failed. Weapons went cold. Shields collapsed. A single human war code had overridden the entire battlefield. Vroth's ship drifted helplessly in orbit, caught in the planet's gravity, unable to move. Every screen on his bridge flickered, overridden by a single transmission. A human face appeared, Captain Elias Voss, seated in his war-torn command center, staring directly into Vroth's soul. "You lost the moment you set foot in this system," Voss said. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, final. Vroth felt real fear for the first time in his life. Humanity was not extinct. They had not faded into irrelevance. They had been waiting, and now they were awake. The planet's defense systems activated one last time. The energy cannons fired in unison. The sky became a burning hellscape as red lances of destruction carved through the trapped Zalzir warships. Explosions rippled through space as each one was systematically erased. There were no survivors, no escape pods, no mercy. Vroth's final thoughts were of regret, not for the lives lost, but for the terrible mistake his empire had made. Humanity had not just survived, they had become something else. Something unstoppable. And as his warship was consumed by fire, he knew the truth. The Zalzir had declared war on a dead planet, and the warships had woken up. The battle was over. Above Sol 3b, the wreckage of the Zalzir fleet drifted in silence, reduced to nothing more than shattered metal and debris. Fires flickered in the vacuum, the last remnants of what had once been an unstoppable armada. No distress signals, no survivors, just silence. Deep below, Captain Elias Voss exhaled slowly. His fingers relaxed on the control panel, the glow of the interface reflecting in his tired eyes. The war machine had done its job. Humanity had sent its message. They were still here, and they were not finished. Far beyond the system, in the distant heart of the Zalzir Empire, word of the disaster reached the High Command. At first there was disbelief, then rage, and finally, fear. The Zalzir had spent decades believing humanity was a dying ember, a species on the brink of extinction. They had mocked the remnants of human resistance, treating them as nothing more than scattered insurgents, doomed to fade into obscurity. But the truth had been far worse. The humans had not been running, they had been waiting, and now the galaxy knew. The war against humanity had never ended, it had simply been delayed. Back on Sol 3b, Captain Voss stood at the edge of a deep chasm within the underground command center, staring at the massive war factories buried beneath the surface. Hundreds of dormant drones lined the cavern walls, waiting. The planet's automated defenses had only been partially activated. The full force of what lay beneath this world had not yet been unleashed. Voss placed a hand on the cold steel of the war terminal and spoke softly, "Sleep now." The machines obeyed, their systems shutting down once more, their lights dimming like a beast returning to hibernation. But one day, when the time was right, they would wake up again. And when they did, the Zalzir would learn that humanity had never truly been defeated. They had simply been preparing for what came next. The war was far from over.